Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Honor the Feminine podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Ledford, and today we're stepping into our second episode of our Shame Game series. Now, most of the episodes of the Honor the Feminine podcast stand alone, but we've begun this series, and so if you didn't listen to the first one of this series, episode 100, I invite you to go back and start there. While there will be gorgeous tidbits that could resonate today, you'll just get a fuller picture of what we're doing, of the journey that we're walking through, my shame journey. The path that I started last week around, I'm a no to shame. And realizing that while that was true, there were still places where I wasn't in alignment with that. And so it was time to take a step back and to pull apart these areas. Now we're starting the episodes right now with an oracle card. And last week we started with a Mother Mary Oracle card from the Alana Fairchild deck. And I decided it called to me again this week. And I shuffled the cards up really well. And again, number 28, Our Lady of the Ocean of Rebirth emerged. This is the same card as last week. Now, last week I said, it always surprises me that things are so right on point. And what I realized this week is that it's not that it surprises me. The oracle cards come with the right messages so often that it's not that I'm surprised by that. It's that I'm surprised by how much it delights me. And so I'm delighted to have this card reemerge. And if you remember, this card was about Mother Mary being a champion of my growth, of our growth, of helping to release karmic patterns, of healing from the inside so that the outside may change and reflect the inner beauty and spiritual light. That's what this feels like to me, that change from the inside, that unraveling of the shame so that I'm more in touch with more of my full self. And help to attain, our growth and divine success without getting stuck in those old patterns. And that's around that releasing the karmic patterns. And this fits so beautifully with what got unraveled for me this week. So, again, it was Our Lady of the Ocean of Rebirth, and it delights me to have her with us again. There are 44 cards in this deck, and to pick the same again, this happens to me on a regular basis when the messaging is really strong. When it's really the message for the moment, I will see the card numerous times in a short period. And yeah, so I'm thrilled to step into the patterns and calling on the oracle and the love of Mother Mary to help me attain my growth and divine success without getting stuck in those old patterns. So last week, as you remember, I spoke about one of the big areas that still held a lot of shame for me was not relinquishing my New York law license, not releasing it. And in that, part of that was just putting it to the side and not dealing with it so that the dues weren't paid and the continuing education wasn't done. And there's it's at the grievance committee up in New York now. And so there's all these wheels that have been turning, and I've just been putting it in the darkness to the side because I didn't want to deal with it, because I had that shame around why I didn't want to continue to be a lawyer, why I did this education and then have set it to the side, it felt like a bit of a failure, even though it wasn't for me. And I've had this whole ebb and flow relationship with it, right? Because I stopped, the last time I was a full-time lawyer was 2003 in New York. So I haven't worked in New York in nearly 15 years. And I did bring that license up to date in 2011, so that I could take the bar in North Carolina, and I've never practiced law here. So I've had this big ebb and flow relationship. And so the commitment this week, since the last time I sat down to be with you and to share, was to call New York and start to figure out what the steps were to clean up this mess, right? Because it's this huge energy leak. And so I will tell you, I had this enormous amount of resistance. It was on my calendar to do it on Thursday. It was on my calendar to do it on Friday. It was on my calendar to do it on Monday. And today is Tuesday. And I am committed to doing this because what my feeling is that the reason for not doing it is my ego trying to keep me safe. Right? Trying to make sure that I have a license for this degree that would have prestige and that I could make money with and that I could be quote unquote successful. And why would anyone give that up? And all of these things. It's that ego being like, what if you need it? There's some of that. And so that's how I know that it's time. And so I called this morning. And I had them look up my file, and this lovely woman, Joanne, shout out to Joanne, was great about walking me through what the next step is. She's sending me the paperwork to have notarized, and what she said to me was, well, Shannon, you really have, you're just basically in arrears for your dues. And so you really have three choices. You can bring those up to date, you can retire, or you can resign. And I already knew. I said, Joanne, I want to resign. Can you tell me what the next step is in that process? And I felt my body get lighter. And I was like, okay. All right. So there's a blue form that I already had. Joanne said, fill that out, write a letter of explanation, and then she's sending me the other paperwork. And so, yeah, the process has started. And I will tell you that as I stepped into it, I set an intention that I would be able to release and resign my New York law license with ease and grace. That this process could have a lot of ease and grace attached to it. And I was really clear about that being my intention. That it was, I'm committed to doing this, my desires to resign, and I would like for this process to be filled with ease and grace. And so that call was hard to make, and I kept putting it off. And as I got off the phone, and this phone call lasted maybe 6 minutes, I thought, oh my God, why did I waste so much energy and so much time on the what ifs? Oh my God, it's going to take so long. Oh my God, all of these self-imposed ideas about, how long it was going to take and how arduous it was going to be and and if I wanted to release it, it was going to be hard. And it was filled with ease and grace today. And so all of that, all of those old stories around it was going to be hard and it was going to take a lot of time and energy and all these things, I had created those. And I'd created those out of a couple of things that have sort of unraveled around that. And it was in 2011, the last time I stepped into my law license in New York to bring it up to date so I could sit for the bar in North Carolina. There was a lot of hoop jumping to do, and I had to do a lot of things, and I had to pay a lot of money, and there were all of these things. And so some of that sort of practical was tied up in it, but even more, it was that when I worked in New York, it was hard on my body. It was hard on my soul. It was not in alignment with who I am or what I'm meant to do. And so there was this trudging and drudgery and sort of life-sucking quality to it. And so this entity, this being of mine, my cells, feel like anything to do with that has to have that quality to it. Like anything to do with working in New York as a lawyer, even resigning that license, has to have that attached, because that's what comes up in my body. And so I just tell you this because I'm noticing all of that today, right? All the old stories, all of the old things, right? But the big patterns that started to emerge are around fire. I am a lot of fire. When we talk about astrology, I have 7 signs in fire. My sun sign is Aries, which is fire. And what fire brings with it is this great creation energy. But it also brings the shadow side of that, and that's the destruction energy. And I spent a lot of time trying to not be in destruction, right? Trying to avoid destruction and to sort of always be in creation mode. And so I'm not afraid to burn things down. Right? I'm not afraid to let things go and to move on and to create anew. But here's the pattern that I'm noticing about myself. And this was one of the patterns that I've carried for a long time. And it's this, that when I burn something down, I then walk away. Right? I burn it down. I walk away. I don't want to deal with what I feel like was a failure. So I just leave that plot of land and I move on to something new. And there are times for this. There are times for this. If you're making that choice. But I wasn't making a choice. I was doing it out of fear. Out of the fear of my own failure. And I wasn't intentional about it. So when I talk about that I've set this intention to release my law license with ease and grace, like I wasn't intentional about when I burned things down. And my law license is like the perfect example of this. And there are many, many others because it's a pattern. But my law license is like this perfect example. It's like I decide I'm not going to do it anymore. It's not for me. I don't want to work and live like that. And I burn it down, and I picked up and I moved to Africa, and a friend and I bought a 1984 Land Cruiser, and we traveled around Africa for 10 months, and I took pictures, and I started a travel photography business. And it was amazing. But I burned it down and then ran away from it without tilling those ashes in, without seeing if there were seeds there, right? It was just like burn it down and then turn my back on it without unraveling it, without seeing what was there in the ashes, if there were seeds or if there was a way to till that back in. And what that created was the space for the shame to grow. Right? So the shame, because I turned my back on it, wasn't intentional about it, ran away from it and thought, that'll just take care of itself. I'm done with that now. It's no longer a part of me. Right? I'm finished with it. I burn it down. It's destroyed. That doesn't serve me very well. Because now, like I talked about last week, I can feel that energy leak, right? That part of me that knows that that's still out there and that it hasn't been taken care of and that it's energetically pulling some of my energy towards it so that I can't focus on what I'm really meant to do. Right? And so I just haven't been intentional about it. And I've let that shame just intertwine over in this dark spot that I turned away from because I felt like a failure, like I couldn't hack it in New York. I was actually quite good at what I did. I didn't want to live like that anymore. And so while that was a choice, I then was not intentional about really letting that go, And so that's what I want to talk about, right? I want to talk about, I was running away because I didn't want you to see it. I didn't want you to see any of the failures or the not taken care ofs. And so that's where it gets the shame can live in me because of the way I did it, right? This is not that you can't burn something down, scorch it down, and decide to start something on a different plot further away. But that needs to be a really conscious and intentional choice that that's what you're doing, right? And so for me, because I left remnants of it to just fester, that didn't work well for me, right? In this situation. And so that's what I'm feeling into around this karmic pattern, is it's around my different choices, right? On how to bring that fire destruction so that then I can take the energy and recreate. And it got me thinking about a couple of times in the last few years where I actually had done it differently. Where it wasn't scorch it down, this was a failure, I'm walking away, I don't want anyone to see it, so that failure part, so we'll just leave it over here, right? And so one of the ways that this came up is really actually the shift in the podcast that began at the beginning of this year. So when the Honor the Feminine podcast started at the beginning on January 31st of 2016, so a little over 2 years ago. And before that, there were a number of months of preparation for this, like 6 months, about 5 months of preparation around this. It was about, healing my sisterhood story and really getting more attuned to my intuition. And I got this beautiful rhythm going with it, and I was doing interviews, and I was batching them together to get them out to you, and I loved it, and I loved the interview interaction and coming into sacred space, and I still do. But as I looked in October to those that I had said yes to interviews with, who had said yes to me, who we'd come together with, we were talking about coming together in November for the interview episodes for the beginning of this year, it all felt flat and it was time to shift. Now, if I'm in a slash and burn situation and this feels like a failure, I then would have ended the podcast very abruptly, not talked about it, not been transparent about it. And so this has been this huge shift that I can see. And these are the signposts along the way from, the law license situation that I'm in that's leaking energy to how I've shifted the podcast, right? Everything from, I didn't realize I was going to be doing a episode series on shame. This shame game series came in as a download. And so that's been an interesting way to look at how to burn down parts that the podcast was not going to continue to move in the same direction. It was going to be more raw and more vulnerable and more open and more me. And that those things, so that the way it was and the way I honor the feminine around sisterhood and attuning to my intuition, I still do those things, but those aren't my edge anymore. My edge is around the shadow work, really looking at the shadow, really stepping in and talking about shame. A year ago, I wouldn't have done this. In fact, here's a funny story. When I was given Brene Brown's Daring Greatly, a number of years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I started to read it, and the first part was about vulnerability, and I'm like, yes, I'd seen vulnerability as weakness. I'd started to really step into my story around that, and then we got to the shame part. And I was like, oh no, no thank you, sister. I closed that book and put it on the shelf. I did go back to it a year, 18 months later. But, there was a time when I couldn't have talked about this. I wouldn't have wanted you to see what a mess I had made of all of this, that I don't have all my shit together. So, yeah. And so the podcast then is really different, because this shift in the podcast it's burning part of it down and using those ashes to till into the soil that is the podcast, so that she and I can continue to grow together, but in new ways. So it doesn't look exactly the same. This actually also happened to me. I have a network marketing business with Juice Plus, and about 2.5 years into that business, I wasn't loving it. I had a lot of success, but I was dragging it along with a lot of my wounded masculine bulldozing through the world, and I felt depleted. And my first thought was, well, I'm just going to leave this behind and I'll go do something else. Like, this is done now. And do you know that it was 2.5 years into my working as a corporate lawyer in New York that I was like, oh, I'm going to leave this behind. I'm done with this now. And I had that light bulb moment then. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's not the what I'm doing. It's the how I'm doing it. And so working in your own franchise, in network marketing, is this beautiful, fertile ground to do things your way, to try a different how. And I don't work as closely with that business now. I still have that business, but it's not where my attention is at the moment. But it was this gorgeous training ground for me, and I am deeply grateful for that. But that was a time when I watched myself going to just burn it to the ground and walk away, and decided to do it differently. And so the law license is sort of the last vestige of some of this old karmic patterning around burn it down. That was a failure. If shame's going to grow there, that's fine. I'm going to turn my back on it and we just won't show anybody and it'll be fine. I don't want you to think that I have all of this mess, that it feels like all of this mess to clean up, where I didn't do the paperwork and didn't pay the dues and didn't do the continuing legal education and maybe didn't believe in myself enough to release that, to know that I don't need that license in order to be successful. That maybe I thought I needed a fallback. I can't imagine going back to that. And yet there it was. Or that I still have that little girl that believes that this is when her daddy was the most proud of her, right? And wants to hold on to that, even though that's a story she's holding on to. So, these have been what's come up this week, what has started to unravel, really seeing my pattern, right? And that this idea around fire being not just creating, but that also has to have this other side of destruction. And this idea was made really clear for me by Maya Toll recently. So big shout out to Maya. She was on the podcast a few weeks ago and is full of wisdom. But this idea around when you destroy it, what's in the ashes, right? Can you till those into the soil? Are there embers there still to blow on? Are there seeds under there that are being tempered? Maya got me thinking about all these things in all these ways. And that started to help me realize, to clear some of what my patterning is and the karmic patterns that I'm breaking up, and the ways in which I've already started to do that. When I talk about, it's not the what I was doing, it was the how that I brought to a network marketing business. It's not the what. It wasn't about burn down the whole podcast. I don't want to podcast anymore because this feels a little stagnant. It was about what part of this can we burn down and recreate? Right? That. And so we're going to continue on this journey around the shame. And I could just feel all of that shame in my body. And when I didn't make the call on Thursday and I didn't make the call on Friday, and I was committed to myself, and yet I just couldn't pick up the phone. And yet I had the stack of paper that I'd been accumulating with regard to my New York law license. And so I'd found the phone number and I'd found the paperwork that I'd filled out, and I started there. I started by going through it and reorienting myself to it. And then I set that intention. I set the intention to release this New York law license and to bring as much ease and grace to this process as I could. That's what I was calling in. That's the difference for me. It's the intentionality. It's not about not practicing law anymore or releasing the license. It's about really choosing that. It's about really choosing the plot that I am going to continue to put effort into, right? And my soul and my destiny and my energy and my essence. It's that. And so I deeply invite you this week to feel into if there are parts of your work, of your life that need some destruction, right? Because I also, being fire, I last year really intentionally burned down some relationships, did some ritual clearing and burned shit down. But it was very intentional. I did it with a lot of intention, and I really cleared out energetically a lot of what was going on in those relationships. That was a big difference to the ditching corporate law in New York and not letting go and resigning. This is the ritual. This that I'm walking through now, that I'm doing with you, this is the ritual part. This may sound nuts, but this is sacred. This is the ritual part. This is the devotion to me, to my surrendering this year, to my co-creation with spirit, to all of those things. This is the ritual to bring that energy leak, to close it, to get some real closure by releasing and bring that energy back into me to be used more fruitfully, more as it's meant to be by me. That's what this is about. This is ritual. And it took some action on the surface, right? Yeah. The Mother Mary card talked about healing from the inside so that the outside may change and reflect my inner beauty and spiritual light, all of our inner beauty and spiritual light. But what that took for me was some action on the surface, some ritual to create the space to really unravel some of this inside so that I could feel into it. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I'm in deep gratitude to you for joining me on this series, on the Shame Game series. And we're going to do 9 episodes. So we're going to do episode 100 to 108. And this is episode 101. So we're going to continue to walk it as I unravel all of this. I would love to hear from you. You can join us at our Facebook community at Honor the Feminine Rhythm. It's a place to really deeply connect. I love deep connection. And so if this has touched you in some way, I'd love to hear what you're thinking, what it brought up, if you have questions. Also, if you'd like to deepen in with me, there are a couple of ways to do that coming up. Eval Denolfi and I are doing a virtual class on remembering boundaries because boundaries can be tricky. And so that class will start in mid-March. And then we're doing an in-person Remembering Divine Union retreat because coming together, it changes everything. And to attune to your body and your guides, to get more embodied and to open up to spirit and to your guides and to your messages, it changes everything. And so I invite you to come and be in person and let's hug. I love that, actually. When I say that a lot. I'm actually going to a retreat in DC this weekend with many of the women I was at Mount Shasta with last year, being led by Amy Tetsumi and Miyuki Yamamoto. And I wrote them today around something and I said, I'm just looking so forward to hugging you, like to giving you a hug in a few days. Like that's part of the reason to come together, because of hugs. So I will leave you today. Thank you for joining me on this journey. All right. Have a magical week.